Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from the coffee break. And it is my honor to introduce Professor Herman Cappelen to give this keynote. Personally, I've attended one of his talks a few years back and loved it. So I'm really happy that I got to introduce him today. And he is the chair professor of philosophy in our university. And he also serves as the director of AI Humanity Lab here at HKU. He's also the director of the very famous master program in AI ethics and society, and also the editor-in-chief of Inquiry Interdisciplinary Journal of Philosophy. His influence in the field is global. As a philosopher, his work spans mostly from fundamental questions of language and mind, and more recently, he has been at the forefront of considering that a human AI communication is how this communication is reshaping how we understand our new relationships in a digital age. So today he joined us in discussing this very proactive and timely, interesting topic. So with no further ado, let's welcome.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction and for having me. And I'm sorry that I changed my title since this was first announced many months ago. I'm very happy to be able to talk about these issues with people who care about education. That's where I've spent my entire professional life. And I have to admit, I wake up alternating with despair, thinking that there's not going to be any universities left pretty soon. And then sometimes I'm very optimistic. So I'm going to try to be on the more optimistic side today and try to find a role for higher education and for what we're doing when we have these new agents that seemingly can do everything we do better than us. And there's going to be a lot of sort of seemingly maybe weird philosophy stuff about Plato and Kant and the Enlightenment, but I think it's relevant to what we're doing. So I hope that's going to be useful. Ultimately, the thing I'm going to talk about is just judgment and belief and what it is to believe something, what it is to have a belief, and how that's different from getting an answer. But this slide won't make any sense until I get to the very end. So I'm going to just keep going. So for those of us who I think are at all intellectually curious about our own profession, we should be really, really worried because the thing that we offer, knowledge, insight, training, and so on, just looks like it's now available on your phone, on a tap, with capacity that far exceeds anything that I have. I'll remember all my students' names. I will know everything about their backgrounds. It will know everything about everything that has ever been written about a topic. It can adjust it to every single individual student. So I don't look that relevant. And then for each of the students, they're like, well, why do I need to know this? Because everything is just in here. So you're telling me that I have to come up with these answers without looking at this one? Like, what is the point of all of this anymore? And so for me, I think the kind of basic question is really this, like, why do we even have universities anymore? What will they be needed in 5, 10, 15 years if we really have this massive transformation through AI? So I think the wrong kinds of questions they're not the wrong questions. I understand why people ask them. They're questions about plagiarism, classroom rules, assessments, and so on. But I think in order to even understand that, we need to sort of address this more fundamental question. And so throughout the history of education, is like this millennia-long tradition. It's remarkable. Universities are older institutions than almost anything on earth, human-made, except for cities, older than countries. Why do we have them? Well, lots of reasons: professional training, formations of persons, elite reproduction, getting research, knowledge transmission, social mobility, citizenship, national development. All of these things have been mentioned as important. I'm going to talk quite a bit about work, self-development, and citizenship. China is like a great example. the explosion in higher education is like more radical there than almost anywhere else. And it was really focused on development and workforce model, where the thought was, well, we just need these people who know a lot, because we need people who know a lot in order to develop our industrial base better and to become more competitive. But if that's the reason, as I've now said a couple of times already, it just looks like a ton of those skills, just people who know a lot, who are intellectually capable, can be replaced. And that's, I think, one of the fundamental worries that we should have, that if the model is the one that says this is something we need to put into our students to shape our students so they can serve a certain role in the workforce, it's very dubious that that justification will go on. So that's the initial sort of setup. I'll talk a little bit more about why universities, then I'll talk about the Enlightenment, and then I'll tell you why I think universities are needed. So, as I said, I'll focus on these three things: work, self-development, and citizenship. And I'll go kind of back and forth between them a bit. I've already said why I think if you're having universities to train people for jobs, it is becoming increasingly unclear, especially if you believe the hype that we will have very powerful AI very soon. It just looks like a lot of the work tasks that we're preparing people for is just about, I do think this is a very difficult justification as we're moving forward. It's going to be very difficult. I think self-development, my very first job was at this little liberal arts college in upstate New York. And it was a great job. But the first week I was there, my dean, said, you know, like, this college is really Club Med with teachers. And it's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you know, people come here, they have a good time, they develop into better people and so on. But these were very elite, special people that paid a fortune to basically have a great time for 4 years. That is going to be a very small percentage of the number of students that are now currently at university level. So I think the self-development part, okay, great, awesome for the people who can afford it. But I think if you try to sell spending 4 years of your life thinking about the alternative cost, it's going to be very difficult to justify it in that way. Citizenship, just that we need people who are of a certain kind, I think that's powerful. But for reasons that I'll talk about later, we need to really think hard about the way in which it shapes citizenship. So I'm going to come back to that. So I think those are the kind of main pressures. So to repeat the job training thing, I think as a motivation is very difficult. Self-development and citizenship needs more evidence. We need to really think about the way in which that's done. And that's what I'm going to think about for the most part. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about this issue. So I need to set it up a little bit so it makes sense. Given this background of what I just said, where it looks like you got intelligence and knowledge and information available on a tap, and it looks like you don't need to put it into humans anymore. One answer when I talk to colleagues here, when I go to conferences, is, okay, well, fine. But there are some basic skills that humans need prior to using the AI. And what we should give them is that foundation. I hope all of you will have had that thought that, well, okay, it's fine to have an AI, but you need to be able to ask the right question. You need to be able to be critical. You need to be able to be curious. You need to be able to connect things and stuff like that. So those are kind of foundational skills. Does that make sense? There's some things that we can give them that they need in order to use the AI the right way. Think of those as the foundational skills. And what I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes is what counts as foundational. Because I think we talk about that in a very sloppy way. And I really don't know what counts as foundational. I think it's a really hard notion, what is needed in order to use the AI the right way. And so we'll talk about Plato and Kant. Believe it or not. So the sort of things that I just said, people, You have to have critical sense. You'll be asked the right question. You need some kind of logic. You need understanding, curiosity, creativity, stuff like that. So here's the first point. Just saying what's foundational leaves out the question of how do you pick what's foundational. So I want to talk about Plato. So very importantly, Plato said that writing was awful. And he had a really good point. Now, we don't agree with that point, but there's a terrific argument from the point of view of where they were when Plato was writing. So just to get clear about why I'm saying this, we were trying to figure out what counts as foundational. Plato thought remembering, having the logical structures in your head was foundational. He says this invention will produce forgetfulness in the souls of those who learn it. So he thought writing was a technological shortcut that would hollow out the mind and make people less intelligent. He thought memory is foundational. Writing is an external tool. It places the marks of thought outside the soul on a surface that anyone can just carry around, copy, or lose. And he was like, this is ridiculous. It should be inside of your soul. The fact that we can have it on the outside meant that this practice of doing it from the inside was lost. And he said, writing creates the appearance of wisdom without its substance. Readers receive information with little teaching. They will seem to know while knowing nothing. So we think this is ridiculous. We don't train people to remember everything. We say, no, that's not foundational. But I think that's, there is a point of view from which you might think this is the right thing. Memory wasn't something just in each individual. It was the way people did philosophy. It was the way law was practiced, religion was practiced, politics was practiced. And we really dismantle a whole form of cognition when we took over this new technology of writing. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So that's a very important point in human history where one form of externalization, namely what everyone remembered, now be put into print, shifted the structure of cognition radically. And part of what I'm going to say is that I think AI is doing something similar, but we shouldn't really panic about it. I mean, it'll be a shift, and we shouldn't be sad about it. In some of the ways that Plato was sad, and you can understand why that was right. But as we get towards the end, I'll try to explain how I think this is similar to what Plato worried about. Now, of course, after writing, things got worse from Plato's point of view. Initially, you just had manuscripts. You had to go to libraries. They were precious things that were kept by special people, very important part of certain communities. You'd have to be with a master in order to get close to those texts. So that was forget about you have to remember everything. It's like, no, we have writing, but it's just very special, and you have to go to a special place to read it. Then print culture came along, everything became available. You could reproduce it, and things got much easier. That was another technological change that was massive. Then we got the internet, incredible worries sprang out of that along the same lines. So, okay, so this is an initial sort of deflationary story. Maybe you might think, look, there's always been technological change. We've overcome it. AI is just going to be like that. But I do think AI is different. So different in the way that you're all kind of aware of already. It doesn't just give you information. It doesn't just store information. It generates reasoning, prose, code, images, plans, explanation. It looks like it can do critical thinking, that it can write creative poems. It does some, I give it my very complicated papers, and it seems to understand it. And it can give me feedback. And that really has a kind of interactive effect that we've never seen before. That is different from all these other cases. And so I think for us to be very concrete, just to bring this back again to the university situation, imagine two programmers. I like to think about this case. Some of you will have heard me talk about it before. The first one understands code, has years of training in languages, systems, and architecture, can read what she writes, justify it, and see why it might be wrong. Gets A's in all the classes in computer science at HQ. Second one just vibe codes with a tool as reliable as A's output. So all the code that this doesn't know any coding. It didn't get A in any classes. Vibe coding, you just talk. It doesn't know any languages. Then it has a second model that audits the first one, and a third one that audits that one. Output's just as good, and it's infinitely faster, massively cheaper. Who do you want? Which one is like the better one? Like, there are two questions. One is like, who do you want to hire? Which is one question for the work thing. But in terms of just understanding, I don't know, this person is capable of doing something better than this person is capable of doing it. And it can be just as reliable. And so if you pick the first one, you think there's something valuable about the first one. Sorry, if you pick B, then you're just, so let's try and backtrack for a second. If you think that B, the one who doesn't understand, is as good as A, you're in effect saying that understanding is not foundational, just reliable output is. Understanding the underlying mechanism is not the crucial thing. It's not what we really want from our students. We just want them to produce the output. And so if you want to push against that, you want to say, no, A is really important. You have to tell us what understanding is for. What is the fundamental value of understanding? So the part of the story was to sort of press you to think about what is crucial about really understanding what's going on? What's the value of that? If someone can do the same thing without the understanding. Okay, so I struggle with these questions a lot. Like, I do think it's incredibly difficult. So I'll try to give you an answer that is the kind of traditional answer in the Western intellectual tradition from the Enlightenment. And I think it comes from Kant in the only part of Kant that I think is really readable. It's on what is enlightenment. And this is a beautiful piece of writing. If you don't read anything more by Kant, you should read this one piece. It's like amazing. And Kant says enlightenment is emergence from immaturity. It's from the inability to use one's own understanding without another's guidance. So the whole thesis of this is it's unbelievably important for you as a human and for our citizens to be able to think for ourselves. And you might think that what programmer A was doing was capability of thinking for yourself. B lacked in some important sense that capability to think for themselves. And so I think we're back to one of these points that look like, you know, the sort of Kantian reply from the universities is, yes, this is what we're teaching our students. So they have to write without AI, because that shows they really do understand. They have to go reading without summaries, not just like put the thing you're reading into an AI and that's for summary, solve problems unaided, because that's how you get the capacity to think for yourself. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to say that I think this is a horrible idea and shallow and trivial. So I know this sounds nice. I told you to read Kant, but I actually think just saying that in itself is very unhelpful and maybe even dangerous for reasons I'll give in a bit. I actually don't think thinking for yourself is the ideal, but I'll end on something positive, I promise. I don't think people ever think for themselves. I think it's like a romantic illusion. We were always using instruments institution, textbooks, search engines, teachers who were part of communities. So I thought if think by yourself means think unaided, it's just like that never happened and no one should ever try to do it. Not only that, people should use, of course they should use calculators, search engine, print, and writing. Unaided is not really the ideal. So that simple version doesn't work. Not only I think is it not the ideal, but I don't think we really want people to be thinking for themselves about vaccines, about whether they should have cancer treatment or how to avoid an illness. Actually, it turns out in many cases, people just thinking for themselves is incredibly unhelpful and incredibly dangerous if read in a very simplistic way. So where am I going with all this? Remember I was trying to talk to you about what is foundational. And we were thinking, well, one of these very foundational things must be to think for yourself, having this sense of being able to just critically assess everything. We need to give that to our students. And that was the Kantian ideal. It's the ideal from the Enlightenment. It's the ideal from what is Enlightenment, Kant's paper. And I'm telling you, I actually think that isn't the right way to think about it. I will tell you what I think is the right way to think about it, but I think this is too simple and we need to be more subtle. It's always been a slogan. And I will try to tell you what I want to put in place of it. So I really care about this last part of this talk. So I'll go through it pretty slowly. I do think something that we do when we think is really important, but I don't think it means that it has to be unaided or think for yourself or anything quite like that. It's something where you can integrate AI very deeply into what you're doing. So it'll take a little bit of, but here's for me the most helpful way to think about it. We're always, when we think, part of a cognitive system. All thinking is part of a cognitive infrastructure. Even when Plato was criticizing writing, he was spending time with people, and the support of those people and teachers and mentoringship relationships, the social setting that Plato was in was crucial. So I think we've always been part of these kind of foundational cognitive infrastructures. I think what I'm going to try to circle in on for now is judgment. That's the point, that's the thing we need to give students. That's the thing that AI can never do, ever do. And only we can do it. And we have to learn people to do it. So that's the next 10 minutes. And so it's a very simple point, really. You and I and all our students and communities and groups and so on, today we had a department meeting about who to hire. We had to make a decision. And there's this thing about making a decision is taking responsibility and standing for a view. We all knew we could hire A or B or neither, or we could try to hire both. That was like a 2-hour meeting today. And we, as a group, had to take responsibility for that decision. And that act of taking responsibility, I think, is the crucial thing. Don't confuse that with like think for yourself. Don't use it with something simple like being critical. It's nothing as simple as that. It's this sort of trying to endorse, figure out the point at which you're willing to endorse something. So I'll give you some examples. I'm originally Norwegian, and I wrote, in Norway, everyone who goes to university has to do 1 year of philosophy. And I wrote the textbook for that at the University of Oslo. And I wrote an introduction to this Kant piece. And I started by writing about AI. This is like several years ago. And I said, look, there's so many questions where there just aren't any. And they're all the most important questions. There isn't an answer that you can get from AI. There just isn't. If you're going to be religious or not, they can't tell you. If you want to be religious, which religion? If you want to have a value system or a morality, which one do you pick? There is never, for reasons I'll give you in 2 minutes, there won't be an answer to that. There are no objective answers to those things. And there are no, even if there are objective answers, they're not answers that we have access to in any kind of way that an AI can do for us. So here is some questions. What is a good and virtuous life? What is the best performance of the Goldberg variations? Something I spent a lot of time thinking about. What is a just distribution of goods? What is the best form of collective decision making? Is there universal morality or is everything relative? And so on and so forth. Basically, all the kinds of foundational questions that I and my colleague philosophers spend all our time thinking about, but which in some ways is at the foundation of everything else. Because you can't do politics, you can't do science without knowing what numbers are, but no mathematician can tell you what a number is. So try to put any of this into an AI and just give you, here's what's going to happen. It will say, well, there are 15, 20, 30 different answers. There's disagreement throughout human history. So you'll get a bunch of candidate answers, but it will be no way. So the only way to get an answer is for you to endorse one or the other. So there are two ways this can happen. Some of these questions, have an answer only by virtue of your reaction to them. So now this is going to be kind of philosophical, so I apologize. So this is what some philosophers call response dependence. The truth of some things depend on how you as an individual or as a group react to it. I happen to think lots of things are like that. And then there are other things, like what are numbers, what is an explanation, and so on, where we just don't have what is morality, where we don't have any answers at all. So there's this rotten fish in the region called rakefisk. It's been rotting for 4 or 5 weeks, and I find it delicious. But most of you, if you try to eat it, would not think it was delicious. Is it true? Is it false? Well, an AI can't tell you. The truth and falsity of that depends on your reaction. Who should you love? How should you relate to your family? Which part of your family? Those are not independent of your reactions. Now, those reactions is not like, oh, think for yourself, be critical, be logical. I don't think that's the right kind of thing. You have to recognize that moment of judgment in yourself, and it can be completely aided. There's no reason to exclude AI from getting to that point. I just want to point out that the crucial thing for all these questions is which one of them you endorse. And there just isn't an answer from an AI. Okay. So this was the point. So the point I've been trying to convey to you is we have some kind of shallow, easy first questions. What is it that we need to give students when AIs can do everything? Oh, think for yourself, be critical, be curious, ask questions. I think that's all kind of a form of bullshit. You have to think much more carefully. What we really need is to think about what happens when you, as an agent or as a group that you're a part of, end up being in a position to endorse one of the many, many answers, candidate answers, and take the responsibility for it in your own life, and what that responsibility implies. That's the thing we have to make salient to the students and train them to figure out how to do. It's not like a new thing. They know how to do it. They know how to do that. This is like what we've been doing. This is not a new thing that I'm just inventing. Just make them aware of it, and AI fits into that in a pretty smooth way, I think. So the question, I think, is not we can use AIs to get answers. Yeah, we can get answers, but lots of things just don't have any answers. They have candidate answers. So the question really is, what do I, on reflection, take to be true, good, or mine? And then how do you live by that? So that act of endorsing something, making it yours, and taking responsibility for it, that's the part that can never be offloaded to AI or really to any other agent at all. So, and again, I don't think this is like some radical new insight, but it puts AI in a new perspective, because it just literally isn't something an AI can do. It cannot do it for you. So no matter how radical AI is as a technology and how different it is in its capacity to generate new ideas, to be critical and understand and so on, and I happen to think it can do all those things. I happen to think it is a completely revolutionary, radical new technology in its capacities and in the kind of thing that it is. I just don't think it can ever do this for us, make me find out what I should believe. And so it doesn't threaten that act at all. So this is a kind of summary of where we are. I started by talking a bit about why we should have universities. Initially, it was justified by the producing scarce cognitive labor, and then the worry is, well, AI can do all that for you. AI can make that labor cheaper. And then we were thinking, well, okay, but we still need these foundational skills that will enable us to use the AI. And then I said, well, yeah, that's in some sense maybe true, but we really need to push on that question of what a foundational skill is. And we are tending to give shallow, superficial, poorly thought out answers to that, I think. I find a lot of that doing it. And I think you can sort of see the source of a lot of that in the think for yourself kind of thing. That's in effect, be critical, have some sense of logic, ask the right questions. But I don't really think that's the right way to think about it, because that can often be just a disaster. I think what we really need to focus on is the stuff at the very end about how you end up having a view that belongs to you, and then you know how to act on it. So I'm going to spend the last few minutes talking about that. So I hope that overall structure is clear. There's this weird thing at the end up making a belief or a commitment yourself, your own, and taking responsibility for it. And then the thought that obviously that isn't something an AI could ever do. So it doesn't even compete. And we have to make that salient to the students. Okay, so you might think, well, okay, I've been talking about endorsing or taking responsibility for beliefs. Why is that so crucial? Why am I making that the center of intellectual life? I think there's a way of living where you just do what other people tell you to do. You try to avoid making choices. And you can sort of imagine a person like that. But I think we would all agree that that's a bad form of life. Like someone who's not on their own endorsing the advice they're given, or endorsing that they should follow what such and such person says. I think that sort of making decisions and belief systems your own is part of what it is to live a good life. And I don't have that much of an argument for this. I think it's a kind of, that is maybe my romantic ideal that I inherited from the Enlightenment tradition. Not that you should necessarily think for yourself, but that this and making it your own, even if you didn't think it all through by yourself, that's one of the key parts of having a good life. And then no expert, no LLM model can take that final step for you. If you tried to do it, it wouldn't be your life anymore. You would be living someone else's life. I know this is not very like concrete advice to universities, but for me, what follows from it is really don't be scared of these external devices. I do think the fear of AI is sort of reminiscent of Plato being scared of writing, or everyone else always being scared of every other kind of technology. I think that the core intellectual challenge and cognitive challenge in the human life is this taking responsibility part, and there just isn't a way that AI could do that for you. So just use it as a tool very freely. I don't think this is just about individuals, by the way. It holds for groups. I gave you an example earlier. Sorry, how am I doing on time? Is there someone keeping track of time? I'm good. Okay. I think as societies, organizations, group, universities, departments, my little philosophy department, a lot of us think of belief, commitment, responsibility on a very individualistic way. I don't think of it like that. I think as a member of a group, we take responsibilities and commitments and take things on board and have to live by them. Hiring 2 people, like I was talking about today, is very much like that. We have to live with them for the next 20 years. So it's a very deep commitment that we're taking on if we decide to hire them. So I think this is not just personal, it's also deeply political, this idea that you have to take this on board. So for those of you who know the literature around AI and political decision making, lots of literature, but why do we even need politicians? We could just have AIs run everything. They're smarter, they work all the time, they know everything, they're never corrupt, they don't get drunk, they don't do anything bad, they can just make decisions, know all the rules. Well, I think that's an inconceivability if you have my view. You just couldn't, because you need someone to take this on board on behalf of the group. And there are many ways of doing that, but it just cannot be done by something that's not a part of that group. So I think I've said everything. I'm getting towards the end here. So I think what we need to tell our students or convey to our students is something maybe clearer than anything I've said in this talk so far. But I think the important thing is to get them to think, what do I, on reflection, take to be true good or mine in some deep sense? And as we're doing that, don't worry too much about if they're using AI to do it. AI cannot perform that act for them. Now, I know that when I'm saying all this, I'm ignoring all the problems. So what about cheating? What about how to do assessments? I agree those things are difficult. But the fundamental goal we have, I think, is sort of remaining the same as it's always been. And we should think of AI, and this is the positive spin of it, I think, as a tool that makes us better prior to, on reflection, take on something as true, because we are, ideally, if AI works the right way, less susceptible to misinformation. We have more information in our hands, more options to choose from. So I'm a moderate optimist about the future of higher education and my own profession. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm a learning scientist, and I enjoy observing people thinking. And I think what I have just observed is a wonderful journey of thinking. So I very much enjoyed it. And I think having a conversation with a philosopher is going to be even more interesting. So with that said, do we have any questions from the floor? Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, maybe Professor Lau, you can get us started.
Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. And I do agree totally with you in the sense that I don't think it's profitable or even reasonable to think about giving up on AI. And I think if we as educators give up on getting our students to use AI, that's stupid. That said, I've been also thinking, so we are now looking at different technologies, say from sorts of writing to printing and so on. I see these as cognitive tools. And with each kind of cognitive tools that are available to us, I see, yes, we lose some of what we were able to do because we've offloaded it so that we can onload something different. So to me, I see human history as a history of human intelligence being enhanced in some way because of the technologies that we have produced. But I still haven't figured out, so what does it mean for human intelligence when we now have AI? So I would like to hear what a philosopher thinks about this. Thank you.
That's a great question. So I think, an optimist here. I do agree with you that we were capable of doing more cognitively and intellectually when we started writing things down. I think there was a very small elite of people with very special brain structures who spent a lot of time just memorizing things. And so it kept the capacity for intelligence and cognition to a very small group of people. And as we were expanding the technology, we not only raised more people, but even the people at the top were capable of doing better work. So I completely agree that this is sort of the evolution of something that makes us, the cognitive system that we're a part of, that we're offloading to, makes the results even better. And I think we're already seeing this, like AlphaFold can suddenly do work on protein folding that it would take thousands of humans years to do, literally, everything it's doing. And I think in the case of the most fundamental questions, like these kinds of things, it enhances everyone's capacity as well. So like you can now go, I know this is going to seem shallow initially, but you have a difficult life choice. I don't think an AI can make the choice for you. That was the point of the talk. It has to be integrated, you have to take responsibility, but it'll give you 6, 7, 10, 15, 20 options, whatever you want, for you to have available as options for yourself that you wouldn't have had otherwise. You would have talked to some lazy, uninterested human who didn't have very much time, maybe. I mean, maybe you were very lucky and had some very, very smart, informed, energetic, interested people around you, but most people don't. And so I think this is, by magnitude, something that increases our capacity. Now, it doesn't make you better at making the choices. It makes that you have a higher likelihood of getting it right when you do it. I think that's my optimistic take on it. Now, there's a lot of things you could say on the other side of that. Maybe the systems are biased, maybe the LLMs are prejudiced in various kinds of ways, maybe they undermine your cognitive capacity in some other way that makes it harder to do the right kind of work. I actually happen to not think that. I think that people are going to do more intellectual work with better resources than they had before. So it's going to be analogous to, like, you might have had to remember everything, but now you have books. You might have to travel 600 days to find the book. Now the book is like right here. You can do it. And all of those things, I think, raised us up, and the same thing with AI. That's my very optimistic thought when I'm on my optimistic days.
Great, thank you. And I know Professor Lee has a question.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. Could you go back to the slide about programmer A and B? Sorry.
Yeah.
So I like your idea about responsibility taking, and that certainly resonates with, Enlightenment thinking and Western philosophy. But so when I saw, so let's say I am a curriculum designer for a computer science graduate school program or taught master's program. And I am deciding, so what I'm trying to ask is like what your answer helps or doesn't help answer. So let's say I'm a curriculum designer for a taught master's program in computer science, and I have this executive power to decide what kind of skills or foundational skills I want to teach. One way to go about it is to cultivate students like programmer A. And so my point is that programmer A and B can take responsibilities, both of them, but in a very different way. And I'm not sure if your answer helps me distinguish or like helps me really articulate what kind of programmer I should be raising.
Right.
So
No,
programmer A is, they can take responsibilities for the code that they write and generate, right? But programmer B can also take responsibilities, but in different ways. Like, so if programmer B's codes are junky or erroneous, then they can sort of like take responsibilities for, okay, here's the rationale for choosing this kind of white coding and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so when both of them can take responsibilities in different ways, then like what kind of programmer should I be raising? And I feel like your answer doesn't really help.
Good question. Yeah. So so this was sort of introduced to be, look, you think under, so I was sort of going through, maybe these were all straw men along the way, but I was thinking, what is university really for? What is intellectual life really for? generating understanding is one, I think, very natural thought, critical thinking, curiosity, da, da, da. But I think that I was trying to problematize that. And I think, you're right, both of these can have responsibility. And both of them, I think, have a kind of understanding, but there's a sense of deeper understanding here that I don't think we should fetishize. That's really my view. I don't think that's privileged in terms of intellectual skill or capability. I think you're exactly right. The fundamental move of taking responsibility and accountability could be on both sides. So we shouldn't privilege this. But I think this is what we instinctively reach for when we start talking about, well, what are we really, and that's the people who are scared of AI and says, well, we have to be able to do all the things without AI because we need that deep fundamental understanding. But I think that is in effect like the Plato move with respect to writing. Like, well, writing is really cheating. You should really have it all in your head. And we reject that, even though it wasn't crazy. And I'm not saying this is crazy either. I just think it's basically the same move to prioritize this one. I think that's not the real essence of thinking or something that comes through here. The real essence of thinking is that capacity that I was talking about, and you just correctly pointed out, that could be on both sides. So it wasn't like telling you, which was just, don't fetishize this guy.
Sorry, we have very limited questions. So this one and that one, and we close it. Okay.
Okay.
Professor, very insightful talk indeed. I really enjoyed the idea of putting Plato and Immanuel Kant, face to face, right? And you started with that. So of course, regarding the dialectics and the epistemic formation, the Plato really strives for. And on the other end, you talked about autonomy and critical judgment. But there's another thing Immanuel Kant talks about, that is categorical imperatives, universal laws that everybody has to follow. Because the reason I'm asking this question, because we are talking about institutions, universities. And as you mentioned, you had a very long meeting today, and you must follow some rules and regulations to make some decisions, right? That was the key point. So again, when we're talking about AI, and then institutions need to make rules and categorical imperatives, maybe not as universal as Kant may want, but how can we devise such rules? What should be the process? So from a philosophical point of view, if you have to give advice to these institutions, even our programs that are bringing AI into it, how can we devise such rules or maxims to guide the critical judgment cultivation within our programs?
Okay, great question. I think I don't have super helpful things to say about that. I think it's a great question. What I'll tell you very quickly is super high level. Make sure that the rules are deeply contextualized, local, springs from the people in that particular setting, not decided by Anthropic or OpenAI or DeepSeek or anything big like that. So you need to find systems that can really understand I want something in my department that understands the members of my department, that understands our dynamic, that knows our history, that knows how we hired for the last 5 years and so on. So I wouldn't want those to be universal in the kind of Kantian sense. I would want all those, I'm a deep particularist about morality. I think it should be deeply tied to particular settings and cultures and institutions. So I worry about the sort of top-down imposition from great corporations, but that's kind of a different talk, but I'd happy to talk more about that.
So the last question from Dr. Vincent
Thank you.
Akron, who's also a keynote speaker for tomorrow.
Thank you for a great talk. And I actually had similar questions to some of those and I was wondering what would be programmer C in your coming out of your ideal post-AI university, because I felt like when we moved to the last part, we moved more to, in some ways, what are our preferences, in terms of the judgment. But initially, in fact, not judgment, and you've mentioned it with the foundational question, if you don't have any knowledge, how does it inform your judgment, So what kind of judgment are you making if you don't? And so what is the foundational, what comes as foundational, not just as being mind, but on the knowledge or the shared knowledge side of things?
Yeah, so I think that is connected to the first question and the several of the questions. So I think my view is, I think this is an add-on to what I said during the talk because it's more controversial. I think we should use AI to its max. I am very pro people using it, and that the things we think of as the foundational important, like understanding of their underlying parts, not important. Now, none of that means. So Demis Hassabis is the guy who started DeepMind. He always says the next generation of successful people are going to be the kids, and I always tell my daughter this, that just like live AI. That's just like everything they do is just integrates AI in everything, but still has massive achievements built on top of that. And that's how I'm thinking about Programmer B. So I would want the computer science department. Okay, I hope there's no one there probably are people over there. Don't do any of the stuff you were doing. Throw away all the textbooks. Forget about all the things you were so proud of. Teach everyone vibe coding and do that the best possible way. That's kind of an extreme version of the view I have, and more controversial than what I said in the talk, but I'd be happy to defend it if we have more time.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we still have a lot of questions, but luckily we have him on campus. So I cannot speak for him, but I'm sure you can send emails to him. He can take responsibility and judgment of responding it or not. So I think thank you very much one more time, and let's give a round of applause to Professor Cappelen.